they were planning to use the term fake news to drive a censorship program.
Some members of the media used their
They were always going to intend to crush It's like a fractal image, right? The more you zoom in, the more you see it. It's like you can Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Off Limits News. I'm your host, Harrison Smith, coming to you from NXR Studios. This is part 2 of a 2-part series on what you could call Israeli colonization, or the rather suspicious land acquisitions from the Israeli state and highly connected elite Jews around the world, which seem to be happening in coordination and collaboration. First, I'm going to do a quick review of what we learned last week, just so you can get all the headlines in a quick series, so you can understand that what's happening here are not just one-off individual instances of people purchasing land. Clearly, this is coordinated and happening in concert. Then I'm going to tell you some very exciting things about what's happening with NXR Studios, and then we're going to get into the new information, the stuff I didn't cover last week, including what's going on in South America, around Europe, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere. So Israeli colonization part 2 begins right now with a review of what we learned last week, and we'll begin with our historical note that the land that became Israel, much of it was purchased sort of secretly through organizations from their absentee landowners decades before Israel became a state. These purchases were made in conspiracy of the people buying it, knowing that they would combine it all to create a Jewish state, yet that when they were sold as if they were being purchased by individual buyers. We know that this same strategy is being used in places like Syria right now with Canadian or Australian or American Jews buying up land and then passing it off to organizations like the Jewish National Fund for eventual incorporation into the physical Jewish state. So there's a historical precedent to what we're explaining here, that the private land purchases creating communities has a historical precedent for leading to eventually full-fledged statehood. Then we have this. Israel has seized more land from its neighbors since 2023 than it has in decades. This talking about, of course, the areas immediately surrounding Israel in pursuit of the Greater Israel Project. Obviously, they're seizing much of Gaza, attempting to seize the whole thing. The West Bank settlements have exploded in the last few years, now have full-fledged state backing. Even the United States at this point is calling what's happening in the West Bank terrorism and calling on the Israeli state to hold back, restrain in some way the Jewish settlers that are terrorizing and ethnically cleansing the Christian communities that have been there for 2,000 years. But it's not stopping anytime soon. And then, of course, you have southern Lebanon and chunks of Syria being incorporated, annexed into Israel proper under the guise of safety barriers, safety corridors, this sort of thing. Then, of course, the one that's made headlines probably most out of anywhere outside of Israel is, of course, Albania. The Trump family sparks a revolution in Albania. A luxury development planned by Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump has spurred anti-corruption protests. They've actually gotten very large and in some cases violent with the outrage of the Albanian people, knowing that this private land reserve, this nature reserve, where there's a gathering of flamingos largest in the world, was privatized so it could be sold to Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. And this was negotiated with the president of Albania on Nathan Rothschild's yacht. And of course, we noted that this island, Sazan Island, happens to be right at this strait, right at this narrow sea between 2 points of land. Sazan Island on one side, on the other side, Puglia, the boot heel of Italy. And we noticed that hundreds of people were protesting on that side of the strait as well. Just like in Albania, there was outrage about the Kushners buying this defunct Cold War military base as their private resort. And lo and behold, it turns out directly across the water, exactly the same thing is happening in Italy, with hundreds of people protesting a massive sprawling Israeli resort project in Ostuni, southern Italy, just across the strait from Sazan Island. While looking this up, I discovered there were more instances of Israeli colonization in Italy. Valsesia, the Italian Alpine Valley, turning into an Israeli colony. This also receiving massive backlash and outrage from the locals, just like in Albania and Puglia here in the Alps near Switzerland. There's this valley being taken over by Israelis. The locals there, very unhappy about it, but they're not being listened to. They're resorting to actually threats of violence, mailing things like a bullet to the mayor saying, "This is your last warning, get the Israelis out," but they're not going anywhere. Then, of course, you have sort of the most blatant and obvious and best example, which is this. Israeli official pushes to buy Greek islands as safe haven for Jewish people. So on the event that Iran's missiles come raining down on Israel, they plan to purchase a bunch of islands from Greece where they can send their population. Israeli politician suggests purchasing 40 Greek islands as safe haven for Jews. So this is a direct purchase from the Israeli state, from the Greek state, to establish these actual sovereign territory of Israel off the coast of Greece. But that's in addition to the private purchases, the private developers taking over large parts of Greece as well. From bankingnews.gr, why is this happening? Why Jews are suddenly buying property in Greece en masse? And you have advertisements in Hebrew talking about why you should purchase land in Greece. Same thing is happening in Cyprus. Southern Cypriot EU lawmaker warns Israel is buying Cyprus through growing land acquisitions. They're calling for stricter oversight of foreign land purchases, saying dependence on overseas capital risks increasing outside influence over the economy. The Society of Greek Cypriot Administration. Settlements in all but name. Cyprus on alert over high influx of Israeli citizens, with Israelis having acquired nearly 4,000 properties across Cyprus since 2021, with many of them being transformed into nearly inaccessible gated communities. So they purchase the private land. Sometimes it's villages that have a very low or non-existent population, and they're building the infrastructure. They're gating it off. They're making it private resorts, essentially. Then, of course, you have really unhinged stuff like this. Gino Reinhardt's unhinged plan to give Australian land to Israel and Elon Musk. And so this billionaire, landowner, and mining magnate in Australia is proposing just giving away islands and chunks of Australia to Israel so it can be sovereign territory of Israel on the Australian mainland so they can build their weaponry and drones and missile production, which again seems rather colonial in my opinion. Of course, we talked about Ukraine. A lot of people, debate whether this is real, but the idea of heavenly Jerusalem being built in Ukraine, there may be some legitimacy to it. There may not. Obviously, we didn't make it up. It actually is a proposal being pushed by a Ukrainian Jewish billionaire who's very serious about what he's trying to do. Whether it will come to fruition or not, I don't know. But again, it's not us that's coming up with this. And we pointed out that there is some historical precedent with parts of Ukraine during certain times of the year being exclusive to Jews only. If you're not Jewish, you're not allowed to go there. And despite the fact that the Ukrainian men are dying by the millions on the battlefield against Russia, there are still pilgrimages of tens of thousands of Jews into southern Ukraine for Rosh Hashanah in Uman every single year. Thousands of Jewish pilgrims arrive in Ukraine despite war, showing they have a pretty, large freedom of action, and parts of this country are blocked off for Jews only. Whether it will eventually become heavenly Jerusalem or not, I guess is up to us. But that's sort of the review, right? So you've got the Greek islands, Cyprus, you've got Albania, right across Albania, you've got Ostunia, or on Puglia, the heel of Italy, you've got colonies in the Alps. And maybe now would be, a decent time to go ahead and mention something I was going to save for later, but obviously this is all in follow up to our episode a couple weeks ago about Morocco and the flood of Muslims into Spain and Ceuta, where Israel obviously had a very large hand in that, as well as Israel-connected puppets here in America. And on that note, there's some new information about Morocco as well we'll get to in just a second. But that's your review. So let me tell you now about what's going on within XR Studios. Very shortly, very quickly, the conference is getting bigger. It's getting bigger, it's getting better, it's getting more explosive, it's getting even more speakers. It's really going to be quite an event. And obviously last week I came to you from a hotel room because we were in Dallas doing debates, and there is nothing like, I'm reminded every single time I have this experience, I'm reminded of just how valuable in-person communication is. People like, an example, Viva Fry. I've known for years, talked to him online forever, had him on my show a whole bunch of times. And then we hung out in Dallas, and it's like just a couple hours of in-person hanging out, going to get some dinner, taking an Uber to the studio, whatever it is. It's so much better than years of online communication. You really cannot overstate the value of just in-person, human-to-human contact with our fellow dissidents on the right, which is why I really do encourage you to get tickets to the conference, the Christ is King America After Trump conference that NXR Studios is putting on this November. There's really no better way to reinvigorate your optimism in this very, dark time. There's no better way to, connect to the forces that are actually trying to make a difference and make a change in this world for the better, to feel like you're actually doing something and participating in something real rather than just a bunch of pixels on the screen. You've got to get there in person. You've got to go to newchristianright.com/conference. And if you use the promo code Harrison, all caps, HARRISON, promo code Harrison, all caps, when you buy your conference tickets, you get 20% off if you'd use my promo code Harrison at newchristianright.com/conference. And I really do hope to see you there in November. It's going to be a very exciting time, and I'd hate for you to miss it. Okay, so we continue our coverage of Israeli colonization with South America. And this gets a little bit less clear cut. It's not quite the, Israel is buying Greek islands, like that's as clear as you can possibly make it. This gets a little bit vague, but I'm not the only one to notice what's going on. You've got the Cradle article, the growing Israeli foothold in South America, 3 new battlegrounds. As Tel Aviv exploits the regional resurgent of anti-imperial forces, its foothold in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile faces growing resistance from movements determined to push the occupation state out of Latin America. As condemnation of the Israeli war and their war crimes intensifies across the global south, Tel Aviv is moving swiftly to secure footholds in Latin America, namely across Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. These are strategic offensives and not diplomatic missions or economic ventures. They're designed to re-anchor the occupation state in a region historically hostile to its apartheid policies and colonial practices. And certainly that does seem to be what's happening. It goes through Argentina, the occupation state's southern embassy, saying Argentina is a country built thanks to immigration. Malay's support of Israel is not grounded in libertarian values, which traditionally emphasize non-interventionism and are skeptical towards foreign entanglements. Rather, his is a messianic evangelical Zionism that casts Argentina and Israel as joint stewards of the Judeo-Christian civilization. Malay's political rise has been bankrolled by figures like prominent businessman Eduardo Elstein and marked by overt religious zeal, including affiliations with ultra-Orthodox Chabad Lubavitch movement. His government has already begun selling off state assets, opening the door for Israeli firms like Murokat to take control of critical infrastructure under the guise of efficiency. So this is sort of the model that Israeli influence and Israeli quote-unquote colonization is taking in South America. There are more blatant examples, but this seems to be the movement, because for a while, a lot of the countries in South America have not had friendly diplomatic relationships with Israel. All of that seems to be changing rather rapidly as almost every country south of America finds itself being ruled either by a Jewish person or by somebody who clearly has some sort of religious fervor for Israel and the Jewish people, like Milei, or of course the president of Mexico is a Jewish woman right now. Milei even proposed launching an American Friends of the Isaac Accords, a vehicle to promote Israeli ties across Latin America. So again, this isn't typical. This isn't normal. This isn't one country simply opening up diplomatic relations with another. You'll see that the people now being put into positions of power in South America are very aggressively pro-Israel. They're very aggressively trying to tie Israel into their critical infrastructure, tie them into their diplomatic agreements, make them a full-fledged partner so that nothing that that country wants to do or no agreements it can make can be made without the permission of Israel. It's top-level colonization, you might say. Then you've got Bolivia as well as Chile, both of these having large populations that are against what's going on in Israel. So, of course, there are aggressive actions being taken against them by Israel, which leads you to things like this. Israel sees diplomatic gains in Latin America with Colombia and Venezuela. Israel recorded 2 diplomatic advances in Latin America as Colombia became the second country in the world to recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and Venezuela agreed to restore consular services with Israel for the first time since diplomatic relations were severed in 2009. So, a couple things like that. Again, I don't want to blow this out of proportion. I don't want to be presenting things that are normal diplomatic developments as if they are evidence of some nefarious clandestine operation. However, this is not normal. Since 2009, many countries, and even before in some cases, in South America, severed their diplomatic ties with Israel, were not friendly, were openly antagonistic towards their treatment of Gazans and Palestinians. Now, if that was the case in 2009, and it remained true from 2009 to 2023, why is it that in the years following, when the world opinion on Israel has turned distinctly negative, where whatever outrages you had about Israel prior to 2023 have probably gotten a hell of a lot worse, why is it only now that they've decided that actually they are friends with Israel and don't mind everything that's happening? The timing is very suspicious. Why would it be now when the abuse of the Palestinians, the war crimes, the things that South America severed its ties to Israel over have reached an all-time high? Do they suddenly decide it's fine now? Well, it's been the result of just a few elections. The president of Colombia got elected. And of course, in Venezuela, well, there's a very persuasive operation carried out by America where they kidnapped the president and replaced him with an Israeli puppet. So it's sort of more straightforward in that regard. But Colombia is no less sort of strange and pointed to me. Colombia's foreign ministry announced Monday its recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, a strategic plateau along the border between Israel and Syria, saying the decision was in response to persistent regional instability. So basically, this president gets elected to rule Colombia, to govern Colombia. And by the way, the Jewish population of Colombia is like 0.00025%. Like, it is vanishingly small. Yet this president has a rabbi come up and bless the state of Israel during his inauguration of it all, which again is just a little bit on the nose. A little bit on the nose, if you ask me. And so you have Colombia, not going along with Israel's colonial ambitions in the area until now, in which time they are one of the first to recognize Israel's, according to international law, illegal occupation of the Golan Heights. So good for Israel. And then you've got the Israeli-Argentina connection, which is probably the one talked about most for pretty good reason. And Israel itself, isn't helping to dissuade people from the rumors. In other words, there's a very open and public connection between Israel and Argentina that they celebrate. And of course, this was expressed largely during the World Cup. Israel's bad bets on Argentina, first the World Cup, now the Falklands. Keen to provoke Britain's new prime minister, pro-Israel right-wingers have found a new battlefield in the South Atlantic. It would be stupendously obtuse for Israel's government to join them. Despite Israel's fulsome support, Argentina lost the World Cup final, but now it appears that Israel might be tempted, to mix the sporting metaphors, to go into bat for Buenos Aires again over a tiny island archipelago in the South Atlantic. This time it's not football fandom that's at stake. It would mean declaring diplomatic war on the United Kingdom. Tell me, is this not exactly what they're doing in Morocco? Is this not exactly what they're doing? So you have a European country that is not going along with Israel's plan to the degree that they would like. This European country has property, has territory that it's separated from by an ocean that's technically closer to another nation than it is to the European nation that owns them. And so Israel goes to either Morocco in the case of Ceuta or Argentina in the case of the Falklands and basically says, let's kick up this diplomatic hornet's nest. This hasn't really been an issue for a while. England owns the Falklands, Spain owns Ceuta. It's not really been an issue, but let's make it an issue so that we can get diplomatic concessions elsewhere. It just seems to be very much exactly the same play that's going on. And again, represents this bizarre and indeed suspicious connection between Argentina and Israel ever since Milei got elected. Now, this article is pretty funny. It's from Black Agenda Report, not typically the type of site I would go to. Patagonia forest fires reveal imperialistic theft of protected land. So I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, I'll see what they have to say, but I'm not sure. And of course, it starts with a quote from revolutionary Pan-Africanist Thomas Sankara about how trees are imperialist. I don't know, whatever. But I'm reading this, I'm just like, okay, what is this? Turns out it's a great article. Turns out it's a very well-sourced article. And I went through it and I fact-checked everything that I read from here, and it all turns out to be true. So good on you, Black Agenda Report. Sorry for mistrusting you at first. I still think your ideas are bad, but you're right about this. What transpired in the Andean Patagonia region earlier this year embodies precisely what Sankara described. On January 5th, 2026, arsonists set fire to Patagonia's native forest, triggering massive blazes that scorched up to 52,000 acres in Argentina's Chubut province. Later, on January 16th, 2026, 30,000 hectares were also set on fire in the Biobío and Ñuble regions in Chile. The inferno forced the evacuation of around 50,000 people and destroyed homes and rural structures across the region. The fires engulfed these national parks, all this sort of stuff. Media coverage focused narrowly on the arson attacks against protected lands in the Andean Patagonian region and the suspected direct motives. Yet, these fires raised critical questions about the relationship between conservatism, imperialism, and indigenous struggles over these lands. Again, forget the leftist vocabulary. He actually lays out the facts here. Arson for profit on protected lands. Official investigators determined the fires were caused by arson. Yet, this is not the first time Patagonia forest burned under suspicious circumstances. Several viral accounts by residents have accused the IDF and Israeli Defense Force soldiers allegedly visiting as tourists of starting the fires. And this is well known. When IDF soldiers go through their training, they often take a vacation in Patagonia after, and it's sort of a working vacation where they're sent to like map the region. Again, you could just say that that's a regular training practice, or you could be suspicious of it. I personally am a little bit suspicious of it. While some have dismissed these claims as anti-Semitic, it's not the first time Israeli tourists in Patagonia have faced accusations. Indeed, a string of news stories dating back to at least 2011 documents similar allegations of Israeli tourists setting fires in the protected forests of Patagonia, triggering protests across Argentina and Chile. The most recent fires resulted in the arrest of an Israeli tourist suspected of arson in Torres del Paine National Park, Chile. The Gray Zone investigated this latest round of fires and exposed the imperialist agenda working behind them, and backed by Argentinian President Javier Milei's government. Regardless of the veracity of these specific accusations, what remains critical is the established pattern. These are acts of arson within a long record of similar incidents. And it goes on, and he's right about the timeline of how this happened. But this is one of those cases, like I said last week, where you look at the debunking articles and you actually find a lot of good information, weirdly presented as if it's debunking the claim, but it's not actually debunking the claim. I think you'll see what I mean. So from AccuWeather, again, I want to let you know that the basis of this story is not from blackagenda.com or whatever that was. This is AccuWeather. This is a well-established, mainstream outlet. Wildfires scorch up to 52,000 acres in Argentina's Patagonia. They forced mass evacuations and renewed scrutiny of recent land use policies amid a historic drought. And they talk about these the claims of arson. Chubut's chief prosecutor, Carlos Diaz-Mayer, said evidence supports the hypothesis of an intentional origin. He says investigators found fuel residue at the ignition point of one of the main fires and warned that it started in a strategic location near a primary access route, placing thousands of people at direct risk. So later, when you see them sort of downplaying the threat of this being arson or this being part of a planned operation, well, according to the chief prosecutor, there was evidence that this fire was started intentionally. The fires come 1 month after President Javier Milei announces changes to the land law and forest law that removed limits on foreign purchases of rural land and lifted longstanding restrictions on changing land use after fires. In December, Cabinet Chief Manuel Adorni said the government eliminated a rule that barred changes in land use for decades after a fire, arguing the restriction harmed production. Okay, so they did a land use change that previously you couldn't sell land that had been burned. And probably that rule, if I had to guess, was made specifically to stop this type of operation from happening, where you could burn a part of the national forest and then go, hey, we'll buy that from you and get it for super cheap. Obviously, they didn't want that happening, but that rule was recently repealed just a month before the fires broke out. And also changed rules about foreign land ownership. So again, coincidence? Maybe, but it seems rather coincidental. It seems suspiciously coincidental that they make these changes where you can now sell burned forest and you can sell it to foreign buyers, and then you have arson causing a massive forest fire in the most pristine, formerly protected lands in Argentina. Little suspicious. And of course, Israeli tourists arrested in huge Patagonia fire. This is that previous. So when I was going through the Black Agenda article, I was not just taking his word for it, her word for it, whoever wrote that. I went and looked to see if these examples were legitimate, and of course they are. This is from December 2011, where an Israeli tourist was arrested for starting a huge fire in Patagonia. Again, confirmed from 2011. Nobody's questioning this. This case was in Chile. But you also have this from 2026, the 15th of January. Israeli citizen arrested for lighting fire inside Torres del Paine Park. During the last hours of the detention of an Israeli citizen accused of lighting a cigarette inside Torres del Paine National Park. This is translated, so the English is a little bit messed up. But yes, an Israeli citizen was arrested for starting a fire inside one of these national parks in either Chile or Argentina. Patagonia wildfires become weapons of disinformation. So this is the example where they're trying to debunk these claims, but they're having a hard time. But they're having a little bit of a hard time, and it does get confusing. So this is from batimes.com.ar, a Argentinian mainstream site. An Israeli Jewish plot, accusations against the indigenous Mapuche community, and allegations against real estate business interests are just some of the theories circulating about the origin of the devastating fires burning in Patagonia. These stories are being replicated on social media without any kind of verification, but they're also being pushed by political leaders and public figures who are seizing the opportunity to push their own agendas. Again, debunking article. Investigation and claims. So far, Argentina's judiciary is working on the hypothesis that the fire began as a result of a deliberate human act. We read that earlier with the lead prosecutor saying, yes, there was fuel found at the ignition point of the fire. The fires affecting the picturesque towns of El Hoyo and Epuyén started on January 5th. Initial forensic examination detected the presence of accelerants in the soil. And then they say speculation took hold rapidly. According to the governor, quote, there are many conspiracy theories that are deliberately spread to frighten, confuse, or politicize. Torres has called for the, quote, responsible reporting and alleged, without providing further details, that after a most recent fire in Lague Pueblo, lands were illegally occupied by outsiders. Quote, buses were coming from other provinces, many from Buenos Aires province, and they're still settled here. So this is what I mean. What is this? The governor says there are many conspiracy theories that are deliberately spread to frighten, confuse, or politicize, and the lands are being occupied by foreigners with buses coming from other provinces settling here. So is that a conspiracy, or is that what's actually happening? That sounds like that's what's actually happening, so that would be a confirmation of some of the conspiracy theorizing. So then you've got the Israeli angle. So some people are blaming the locals, the Mapuches, who are like the native people of the land. But then there's the Israeli angle. Quote, I acknowledge that my comment contributes to the irresponsible circulation of hate speech, which is always the prelude to higher levels of violence, especially when it comes from a public figure, said Marcela Fredele on Radio 10 this week. She made the remark after previously stating that the fires in the south had been started by two Israelis. So it claims that this was a mistake and that she apologized, but this is what I mean. You've got this public figure, Marcela Fredele, on Radio 10. She says the fires were started by two Israelis. She's then made to apologize. Her apology is that her comments contribute to hate speech, which is a prelude to higher levels of violence, which is always how, criminalizing anti-Semitism is justified, is that, well, we're not criminalizing, you're allowed to have free speech. You can say whatever you want, but what you're saying is contributing to an anti-Semitic trope that could lead to violence, so therefore you can't say it anymore. She didn't actually say that it wasn't two Israelis that lit the fire. She just said she's sorry she said that because it could contribute to hate speech. Now, I've always said that hate speech is simply when the stereotype matches the reality. So in other words, I guess the stereotype is that Israelis are burning Patagonia to take over the land. And so if reality is that there are Israelis caught starting fires shortly after a land purchase law is passed, that is the stereotype. So you're not allowed to say it. Now, if you'd said these were, Chinese people doing it, I guess that's not a stereotype of Chinese people. So you could say that. It's not a matter of whether it's true or not. It's whether reality, what is true, matches the presupposed bigoted trope that they're trying to defeat. So little strange. So she said it started by two Israelis, and then she apologized for saying that because it contributed to hate speech. But she never said it was false. It's a little weird. Among the other political figures who embrace this hypothesis is former Army Chief Cesar Milani, and I'm pronouncing all these names wrong, I apologize. He shared two photos on his social media, one of a burnt-out forest and another of Malay waving an Israeli flag. The military chief spoke of a, quote, foreign state identified by local residents as responsible for the fires. In response to the circulation of this theory, the Argentine Jewish Appeal published a statement warning of the existence of minority sectors that, quote, seek to sow discord and division within our country, resorting to an old Judeo-phobic, which is weird, you mean anti-Semitic. They're making up new words. Libels such as the apocryphal Plan Andininia, originally conceived in Tsarist Russia, just like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, right? to persecute Jews who joined anarchist and socialist revolutionary movements. The reality is that Patagonia was one of the locations discussed by the early Zionists for a location for the Jewish state. And I think I've explained this before in one of the older Off Limits News episodes, but, there was a split in the early Zionist movement between sort of the Eastern European religious dedicated Zionist and the more secular Western European Zionist, like the leader of it. They were kind of fine. They just wanted a nation, apparently. I mean, according to the history, it was sort of like, well, we just want a nation. We want our own land. It can be Madagascar. It could be Patagonia. It could be the Middle East. And then it was the religious Jews that came up and said, no, it has to be Zion. It has to be in Israel. But Patagonia was always sort of at the top of the list of alternative locations for a Jewish state before they settled and established Israel and Zion. So that's largely where it comes from. And there's a history of this. The Endinia Plan, the New Jerusalem in the Patagonia of Argentina, the Endinia Plan, a theory that maintains the Israeli state, seeks to establish a state in Patagonia, that Israel seeks to establish a state in Patagonia. This has been around for a long time, a long-standing conspiracy theory. It maintains that Israel plans to create a second Jewish state in Argentina and Chilean Patagonia. Its origins can be traced to the end of the 19th century in the context of the rise of Zionism. So this is sort of a long existing plan that just was never fully developed, but has seen renewed interest because of the actions of Malay as well as these suspicious fires. Because just to lay out again, what we know from this is that yes, there were fires 1 month after there was land reform, which opened up fire-damaged lands to purchase and state-owned lands to foreign purchasers. 1 month later, there are the fires that, according to everybody around, were started by Israelis. And certainly there were some fires in Chile where Israel tourists were arrested for starting them. This is not exactly new, with examples going all the way back to 2011. But on the 15th of January, this also occurred. The only place you can find this is Spanish language CNN Chile website, and you have to translate it. And whether or not the Endinia Plan is true, what's happening is enough to get people out on the street angrily protesting what the government is doing in terms of its relationship with Israel. Thousands protest private property legislation in Argentina as clashes erupt with police. As the protest drew to a close on Thursday, scuffles broke out on Congress Square, with protesters targeting police with stones and other projectiles. Security forces responded with tear gas, rubber bullets, and a water cannon. This is from the 7th of this month, August, so just 1 week ago is when this happened, with protesters clashing with police to protest against this controversial private property bill. Protesters mobilized by left-wing movements were undeterred by earlier concessions. Removing one change, it would have made it easier for foreigners and foreign entities to buy land in Argentina. Demonstrators carried Argentine flags and banners reading, "Our homeland is not for sale." And this is in protest of the, quote, inviolability of private property bill being debated currently in Congress. So again, whether this is part of the Endinia Plan from the early Zionists or not, it doesn't matter. The people of Argentina don't like that their laws are being changed to allow Israeli incursions and ownership of their previously protected lands, exactly like what's happening in Albania. Argentina is burning. It's not the forests that are on fire, it's the people. As President Javier Milei attempts to sell off national land to foreigners, the streets of Buenos Aires have erupted with tear gas, rubber bullets, and water cannons. The rallying cry, "The homeland is not for sale." And you can see the fairly sizable protest going on here. I'll turn it down, but they're protesting this law. And then you have this, and this is something that I know about, so I was able to find, but good luck finding this. If you can search on Google, till your hair is gray, you will never find an easily presented story about this. But I know about it, so I was able to find it. I was able to search the right names, and even then, I spelled one a little wrong. I finally got it right, and it finally cropped up. But this is the type of thing that's really hard to find unless you already have pre-existing knowledge about it. Argentina, a closer look at Joe Lewis's private army in Patagonia. The British corporation Hidden Lake, owned by Englishman Joe Lewis, he was connected with George Soros. He's a elite Israeli Jew. functions as a truly autonomous state outside of the law within Argentinian territory that even has a private army used to attack with increasing violence the demonstrators who have tried to gain access to Lake Escondido every February by crossing the mountains and by public road. The private army consists of parastatal groups made of province police and ex-police officers, private security agents, rural laborers, and general laborers from Hidden Lake. So basically there's this lake in Argentina that is owned entirely by this guy, Joe Lewis, who runs it as a private independent state with its own army, and doesn't allow any of the locals of Argentina to be there. And this is just one example of like, did you know this was happening? And what? and just what? He's got a private army? That's crazy. But you can look that up. So again, in Argentina, there's another example of a large, portion of, nature, quote unquote, nature reserve land that's just privately owned by a English/Israeli guy who runs it like a private state with his own army. So this already exists, and this is from all the way back in 2023, and it's been well established by then. So if you don't know this already, it's really hard to find, but it does exist. It's crazy. So then we talk about Venezuela, because obviously Venezuela was a part of the wider war on Iran. And we knew this from the very beginning because, while it wasn't talked about too much before the raid on Venezuela that kidnapped Maduro, I knew for a long time that Venezuela had Hezbollah training camps in its country and was helping Hezbollah by selling, black market weapons or energy. There was a connection between Venezuela and Iran. And so during the operation against Venezuela, while a lot of people on the right were, fully in favor of it, I kept saying, I don't think this is actually about Venezuela. I think this is more about Israel, as sort of, whatever. I get criticized all the time. It's Israel, everything's Israel. But it's like, but why is everything freaking Israel? But why does it all seem to be Israel? So how Maduro overthrow was a key node in the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. It's important to not see them as separate operations. Venezuela was very much a precursor to regime change in Tehran. When the news broke, the U.S. military operation had kidnapped Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in Caracas and transported him to New York to face trial. Among the most enthusiastic and immediate cheers came from Israel, with Benjamin Netanyahu praising President Trump. Says one could argue the Venezuela coup was a precondition on the expansion of Israel's own multi-front war against Iran. Last week, with Venezuelan oil secured under a directed government in Caracas, the U.S., Israel, and other partners launched a regime change campaign the Israeli right wing and its supporters in Washington had been planning for decades directly against Tehran. The Israeli government had long viewed Venezuela as a strategic satellite of the Islamic Republic of Iran. As Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar put it, Israel welcomed the removal of the dictator who led a network of drugs and terror, adding that South America deserves a future free from the axis of terror and drugs. So again, before the Venezuela raid, this was all about drugs. It was about narco-terrorism. This was about freeing the people of Venezuela. This was about getting the oil. In reality, it was all predicated on the eventual war with Iran and trying to basically cripple Iran before you go in and attack by taking out some of its satellites and allies around the world, as well as, getting a supply of oil for when the strait would be cut off. And this is now well acknowledged. So now that they did it, they acknowledge it and admit that, yeah, actually this was largely what it was about the Hezbollah connections, the Iran connections. The threat of Hezbollah operatives is a useful talking point. We have to look at the bigger picture. Venezuela sits on the largest oil reserves. So people saying there are multiple reasons to do this, but I don't think it was a coincidence that we just so happened to make this our priority right before we stormed into Iran. And they've seen the, benefits of this. And tell me if this isn't a little suspicious. So Venezuela, obviously we have no diplomatic connection to them. We kidnap their president in the middle of the night. We basically make a deal with whoever's left and we put a puppet on the throne, as it were. And then for the first time in decades, an American congressional contingent went and made an official state visit to Venezuela. Who do you think they sent from the United States Congress? Well, it just so happened to be Brian Mast, the U.S. congressman who wore his IDF uniform in Congress, and big fat Randy Fine, the most despicably heartless pro-Israel scumbag in the entire government. Venezuela's Rodriguez hosts U.S. congressional delegation to evaluate the joint agenda, and the people they sent were Brian Mast and Randy Fine. to clearly Israeli operatives in the American Congress. A team of U.S. politicians was led by Florida Republican Representative Brian Mast, a military veteran who served voluntarily in the IDF. It also included Florida Republican Representatives Randy Fine and Kat Kammack, alongside Illinois Democrat Representative Jonathan Jackson. So again, when America goes to war with Venezuela, it's at the behest of and for the benefit of Israel in pursuit of their greater conflict with Iran. When we send our congressional delegation, it just so happens to be a congressman who is in the IDF and wears his IDF uniform to Congress, and Randy Fine, who is the most outspoken pro-Israel congressman we probably have at this point, a guy who literally responds with laughter when people send him pictures of babies that Israel has killed because he's a bad person, but he's Israel first. And so, again, this is what modern colonialism looks like. I mean, what else are you supposed to say? America is not acting on America's interests. America is acting on Israel's interests. And America is being run by people who prioritize Israel over us. And when we take out the Venezuelan leadership and send down our delegation, it just so happens to be the most pro-Israel congressman you can imagine. What a coincidence. Then you have another and this is where it gets a little weird, folks. This is where it gets a little tenuous, I have to admit. But also very suspicious, I have to admit. So they take out Venezuela. They establish, just like Colombia did, connections with Israel for the first time in decades. They have a congressional delegation and diplomatic connections with America like they haven't had in decades. And then they get hit by a giant earthquake. PM hails Israeli team for rebuilding relations with Venezuela after 17 years of severed ties. So this delegation went to Venezuela and was in part assisting in rescue operations for the earthquake. But if you hear them talk about what the team from Israel is doing, yes, it says they're trying to rescue people who are trapped in rubble and try to rebuild from the earthquake. And I don't doubt that that's part of their mission. But to hear the way they phrase it, it seems like this earthquake mission is more expansive than you might think. But here's the official story. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday hailed the Israeli delegation providing aid following the major earthquake in Venezuela, saying it is not only helping the country recover from last month's devastating earthquakes, but also rebuilding relations with Caracas nearly 2 decades after it severed ties with Israel. So, all they had to do to reestablish ties with Venezuela was have America overthrow them and perform a coup and put a puppet in place. Isn't that convenient? What a great way to reestablish diplomatic ties by force. So then you've got this. IDF makes home front command history in Venezuela. So yeah, they're helping to fix up the rubble from the earthquake, but it says that they have a continued presence. Israeli officials say the mission's continued presence, even after most international teams have departed, have added significant value to the effort. Approximately 32 Israeli experts are supporting Venezuelan authorities in the transition to rehabilitation phase, the IDF said, describing it as the longest humanitarian assistance mission in the history of the Homefront Command. Brigadier General Yossi Pinto, commander of the National Search and Rescue Unit and head of the emergency mission to Venezuela, said the team is currently operating in the area of greatest destruction near Caracas, where the coastline has sustained extensive damage. But they say the mission is now in the beginning of its 3rd week. Israeli experts are helping to develop a national situational assessment, supporting decision-making processes, setting priorities, and laying the groundwork for long-term rehabilitation, a phase which will continue for months or even years. So tell me, does this sound like emergency rescue help rebuilding from an earthquake? Or does this sound like using the earthquake as an excuse to get your foot in the door and then sort of incrementally take over development of infrastructure nationwide? That's what it sounds like to me. It doesn't sound like they're like, we're here for help. We're boots on the ground, hands where you need them. Where do we go? What rubble do you need to be picked up? It sounds like they're taking over the rehabilitation process for the state of Venezuela is what it sounds like to me. And this is being done through the IDF. But I mean, they say that they're laying the groundwork for long-term rehabilitation that'll take years as they're developing a national assessment for rebuilding. What? So again, it's like, okay, is this really charity? Is this really Israel? Just like, hey, we're friends now. After 20 years, you finally decided to be friends with us, and we just want to show our appreciation by helping you clean up after that horrible earthquake that happened. Or is this sorry about that horrible earthquake. Our team is on its way to take command of the rebuilding effort. Okay, a little bit suspicious. Still, ostensibly, this could be a genuine response to an earthquake. But then something really weird happens where this new Colombian president gets put in. They have the inauguration on a Saturday, I believe, where he has a rabbi get up, give a invocation, and say, "Long live Israel," a country that has not had Israeli diplomatic connection at all for the last 20 years, since 2009. Now has a rabbi giving its invocation at the presidential inauguration saying, "Long live Israel." Long live. I don't think there was an Australian saying "Long live Australia." I don't think there was a German saying "Long live Germany," but there was a Jew saying "Long live Israel." Okay, that was on Saturday. On Monday, a giant earthquake hits Colombia. Okay. That's not a coincidence, right? That's normal, isn't it? And so you have this giant earthquake, and of course you have, yet again, another home front command from Israel going to Colombia saying, "We are a delegation from the state of Israel. We're going to support Colombia following the devastating earthquake. Our history has taught us that in the face of suffering, it isn't enough just to watch from afar. There are moments you have to stand up, take action, and lend a hand." I wonder if this also will become a new IDF home front command where they're laying out the long-term rehabilitation project nationwide. I wonder if that's going to happen. And I wonder if I'm just a conspiracy theorist and it's just a total coincidence that Colombia, after 20 years of wanting nothing to do with Israel, at the height of the outrage about Israel, at the height of the war crimes Israel's committing that have been the cause of the diplomatic severing from all the way back in 2009, they just so happen to elect a president that's super pro-Israel, have a rabbi say, "Long live Israel" at the inauguration, then they happen to have an earthquake, and the IDF swoops in to do just like they did in Venezuela and establish a home front command as on the basis of repairing after the earthquake. Maybe I'm looking at this too much, or maybe this is deeply suspicious and in line with everything else that we've been seeing, and obviously a part of the higher level strategic Israeli operation to turn South America from opposition to allies. I don't know. I guess that's up for you to decide. And of course, there's a lot of anger about the backlash to recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, because that was like the first thing that they did as soon as they got into office, this new Colombian regime. And here comes Israel to help out. You're welcome. Just don't expect them to leave. Then as I'm talking about this, and I do the first episode, people are sending me stuff that I didn't even know about. 1,000 Jews transform Ecuador's party town. Set along Ecuador's Pacific coast, Montañita is steady waves draw surfers from around the world, while its nightlife has earned a reputation as one of the country's most energetic party towns. Now Chabad is there for the visitors. Oh, wonderful. By the way, I should do a whole episode. Maybe I will. Maybe next week will be about Chabad Lubavitch, because that is very much the organization that is sort of the prelude. It's sort of the forerunner of the Israeli colonization, and it's very much a geopolitical tool, the equivalent of Asimov's foundation, if you're familiar with that. So that's South America. Okay, so you've got this Colombian president, you've got the Argentinian president, you've got the Patagonia wildfires, the Chile wildfires, all connected to Israel with the changing of laws to allow the foreign purchase of these things. What's happening in Bolivia is also very suspicious. Apparently Ecuador has a resort town being established, just like we saw in Cezanne in Albania and Italy, and of course resorts that are being built in Cyprus and Greece, which are private gated community for Israelis only. So again, this is happening all over the world, and in South America you see both the colonization physically of building private armies and colonies inside Argentina, but you also see sort of the high level quote unquote colonization, which is just sort of the occupation of these countries by forces that are friendly with Israel, even if all the people and historically the country is against what Israel's doing, they have ways of making you bend the knee. So it's all very interesting. So now let's get into just sort of the wider aspect of how this is being manifested around the world. Because obviously in America, you have tons of neighborhoods that are essentially Jewish only, and you have lots of neighborhoods in America that are exclusive to one ethnicity or another, but there's an interesting way that these things are handled in the media. For example, you have this MAGA YouTuber slammed for sharing anti-Semitic documentary on Lakewood Jews, quote unquote. It's not a documentary if it makes us look bad. So this is Tyler Oliveira. Now, he did a video about, I believe, the Somali or the Haiti community, and it was celebrated and feted and got millions of views and was celebrated everywhere. And the headlines about that are things like YouTuber exposes welfare abuse in Somali community. When it comes to exposing exactly the same thing with exactly the same strategies, only it's Jewish people in Lakewood, New Jersey, the headline is more like YouTuber slammed for anti-Semitism. That's suspicious. I am suspicious of that. And again, it's not so much that these communities like Lakewood, New Jersey, and they're all over America, these sort of exclusively Jewish communities with the Jewish power structure deliberately taking over positions in the school board so they can siphon money away for their private schools. Go watch the documentary if you haven't already about Lakewood, New Jersey. But it's the disconnect in the way these things are covered and talked about. When it's Somalians or Haitians, the media is willing to talk about it and, declaim it, say that it's bad. When it's Jews in New Jersey, you're anti-Semitic for noticing, even though it's exactly the same thing. After Minneapolis, a YouTuber comes for Jewish welfare queens. At a time when federal policy can be shaped by online outrage machine, Tyler Oliveira turned his sights on 2 Jewish communities. Again, the way this is covered, very angry. How dare you suggest that, there shouldn't be sovereign Israeli enclaves inside America. And there are a lot, because you have things like this from Eric C. Anderson on X. They have these eugenic programs all going around the world: Heavenly Jerusalem in Ukraine, Plan in Andenia in Argentina, New Jersey, Cyprus, Greek islands. And he says Thailand and Sri Lanka. I'll show you those in just a second. But this is what was happening to me as I was researching this. It's just like I'm like 5 hours into research, and I'm like, Sri Lanka and Thailand? I got to talk about Sri Lanka and Thailand on top of all this? What the hell? It's like Greece and Cyprus and Albania and Italy and Colombia and Argentina and America. And now I got to talk about Sri Lanka and Thailand as well. So, God only knows. I'm only one man. I can only research for so long. But apparently there's more to this than you think at first. And this is a video about, a place in North Carolina where Jews are basically creating a sovereign land. And again, I don't really have that big of a deal with this. The problem is that when Jews do this, it's celebrated and it's, the Holocaust, so we have a right, we have a need, we have to be safe, we have to protect ourselves, we have to be separate, and it's celebrated and it's seen as a virtue. And then you have federal lawsuit challenges development of whites-only community in Arkansas. So there's tons of these places all over America. There's tons of these communities of exclusively Jews, private land, gated communities, private resorts, Jews only, everybody else excluded. The one time a white group tries to do this, and it's NPR, federal lawsuit. We have to destroy this. White-only community in Arkansas sued for discrimination. Civil rights organizations file lawsuit against white-only housing development in Arkansas. So, lawsuit targets white-only Arkansas community after applicant claims she was rejected for Jewish roots, black husband. It's either fair for everybody or it's fair for nobody. And if you can look at a white-only community and say this is bad, this is suspicious, this is exclusionary and discriminatory, well, then so is Lakewood, New Jersey, or the place in North Carolina, or any of these places, which again is part of the frustration with a lot of the sort of international Jewish community. What's good for Israel is bad for everybody else. Israel can be an ethno-state, but it's the worst sin in the world if you say you want Britain to be an ethno-state. Jews deserve support and protection and their own land and their own protection and their own specific rules, and it needs to be funded by the government. But if you try to do that, it's Jewish groups themselves that will come in and shut you down. That hypocrisy is unsustainable, intolerable, and objectionable, and I'm going to object to it. So there it is. Now, when it comes to things I hadn't really heard much about, you have things like Thailand. I go to research Thailand. Turns out Thailand's solving the problem, as it were. Thai police arrest 2 Israeli citizens on suspicion of business and real estate crimes. So Thailand apparently figured this out and started cracking down on it earlier this year, arresting Israeli citizens for basically running these private land purchases. So involved in the purchase of land through Thai frontmen in an attempt to circumvent the restrictions on foreigners purchasing real estate. So, if you can get the president on your side and he can just change the law, as they're doing in Argentina. If not, you find a Thai person to make straw purchases, in their name, but you're actually getting the land. Just like they did in Palestine in the early 1900s, just like they're doing now in Syria. It's a little suspicious, something we should be on the lookout for. And then you have stuff like this. This is what I was trying to find earlier. When it comes to Morocco, a Jewish rabbi claims that Morocco is the land of his ancestors and will become part of Israel soon. He cites the existence of a shrine to a Jewish figure from centuries ago as evidence. And yes, he literally says this will all be Israeli land because there's some shrine to some Jewish guy that used to live there. So I guess that's theirs, and God gave it to them. So again, at the very end here, he's talking about where this is. This is just some place in Morocco. He says there are many families of Jews living in the area, and with the help of God and in the name of God, we will take this land. Thanks to everybody. Okay, so again, you think Jews are colonizing the world? You're insane. And then there's just like a video of a Jewish guy being like, we're going to take this land. We're going to take it over. It's going to be ours. It used to be ours because Jews used to live here at one point, which it's like, okay, the whole point of like the Jewish population was that they never had land. They've been everywhere. They've lived everywhere. They're constantly moving from one point to another. Everywhere basically in the world has some history of Jewish presence there because at some point, some Jewish person probably lived there. So if you can point to a shrine from some dude 1,000 years ago and say, see, this is Jewish land, then I guess the whole world is Jewish land, which is actually in line with what a lot of the more zealous religious Jews believe. Everyone lost how a Zionist migration program deprived Morocco of its thriving Jewish community. That's the story about Venezuela from before. Okay, so then you had things like this, because just like I was looking up, and it's like Sri Lanka and Thailand. Geez, I've got to look this up now. I didn't even look into Sri Lanka. You're going to have to do that yourself. But Somaliland was another one of these. And I'm like, all right, let me see if there's any validity to this. Because I'm not just taking all claims on face value. I want to actually look into it and determine whether the claims are legit. So I'm looking into this. Beyond recognition, U.S. Somaliland in the new strategic environment. It talks about the end of the towards the end of the U.S.-Iran conflict, strategic alignments, the greater Middle East are beginning to solidify. And it's talking about connections, establishing diplomacy between Somaliland. Somaliland won its war for independence against the government in Mogadishu 35 years ago. Israel recognized Somaliland. I'm like, all right, well, clearly Israel is getting, they want to use Somaliland. Maybe they want to expel the Gazans there, But I'm like, all right, this doesn't seem like something I want to cover because it just seems like, yeah, Israel is gaining diplomatic favor with it. But if I was covering Israel's diplomatic, actions, they're gaining favor all over the place. They're losing favor all over the place. Maybe this isn't the type of thing that belongs in the colonization segment until UAE discreetly builds military base in Somaliland for U.S. and Israel. Okay. Berbera is attracting interest due to its strategic location at the southern entrance of the Red Sea. Satellite images reviewed by Le Monde reveal Berbera Airport has been expanding since October 2025, and essentially the UAE is building a giant military base in Somaliland for the use by American and Israeli military. So again, another bit of a colonial action, if you ask me, again, using other foreign buyers, purchasers, and builders to do it so it doesn't look like it's Israel, but it is actually Israel at the end of the day. And then you had people asking about Iceland. Now, Iceland, and I'm going to have to cut some of this short, but people are going, oh, God, they're taking Iceland too. Watch out, Iceland, they're coming. And it is very suspicious that Ivanka and Jared both were in Iceland at the same time that Rabbi Shmuley was apparently in Iceland. What are they three doing together there? And they're talking about trying to build a resort there, or at least people are speculating about that. And so that reminded me of what's actually happened in Iceland over the last couple of years. And so let me just lay this out for you quickly. Iceland law to outlaw male circumcision sparks a row over religious freedom. So basically there are like no Jews, no Muslims in Iceland, like under 100 of each, like very, very few. So Iceland decides we're going to outlaw male circumcision. Well, they weren't allowed to do that. They weren't allowed to do that in part because U.S. and Jewish international organizations basically said, Iceland, if you're going to ban this ritual, we're going to destroy you economically. There was an official letterhead from the U.S. Congress, from a U.S. congressman, dual citizen with Israel, saying America stands against this and America will punish you if you try to pass this law, because that's what the power of America is used for on the world stage, is ensuring that non-existent populations in Iceland theoretically have the right to mutilate the genitals of their children. Land of the free, right? America, God bless us. U.S. Jewish organizations urge Iceland to nix bill banning circumcision. If passed, the Icelandic measure would create insurmountable challenges for Jews and Muslims living there. Well, they don't, so that's fine. And I think personally, it should be a right of a European nation like Iceland to say they don't want to allow genital mutilation, especially if the only population that would practice such a thing don't exist in Iceland. Isn't that their right? Well, they can't have that say. They are not sovereign. They have to, whatever they do, even their own laws passed in their own country about their own citizens, cannot exist without the approval of the international Jewish community, with America as the golem enforcing its dictates. I think it's despicable. U.S. Representative Ed Royce and Representative Elliot Engel, the committee's ranking member, said in their statements that outlawing the practice would curtail religious freedoms and alienate Iceland's minorities, and they also, threatened to take actions against it. But again, whether it's Brian Mast and Randy Fine, is Jewish American congressmen being the American delegation to Venezuela, just as they reestablish their ties and start a home front command with the IDF. In the same way, Jewish congressmen use the power of the American state to try to pressure Iceland, gets confusing, pressure Iceland to not pass a law not because it's in the interest of America, because the interest of their wider, diaspora and ethnicity. And so then you have this response to this and other things. So this was 2018, around April. In that same time, February 2018, Iceland gets its first rabbi. Rabbi Avi Feldman hopes to ignite a Jewish fire under the Northern Lights. So basically the Jews saw that Iceland was trying to pass a ban of circumcision and decided we don't have enough influence there. Chabad Lubavitch was then deployed. So that he was a Chabad Lubavitcher, and he was dispatched on a mission to Iceland to prevent this type of thing from happening. And so you of course immediately have him calling for Iceland to do more for refugees. And while in 2018, when they were wanting to ban male circumcision, you had, under 100 Jews, under 100 Muslims in the entirety of Iceland. Within just a few short years, you have this Icelandic rabbi saying everybody belongs in Iceland, with Muslim migrants now stabbing people, life-threatening injuries. Women dare not be alone in the neighborhood. As of 2025, in a short 7 years, you have no-go zones in Iceland, a place that was previously completely free of quote-unquote diversity. And you now have, as Based North Manor puts it, there are now Bomalians with guns in Akureyri, which is like this northernmost settlement of Iceland, where you have stabbings of Arabs killing people in Iceland. Thanks, diversity. What would we do without you? Thank God Iceland didn't ban male circumcision, or they wouldn't be able to enjoy this type of enrichment. Same thing happened earlier this year. Jewish leaders say Belgium's prosecution of circumcision is anti-Semitic. So this was two rabbis were arrested for performing illegal circumcisions, that is, circumcisions performed in the traditional ritualistic way with their fingernails and teeth. They were actually reported by another rabbi. And of course, we can't let it stand. America will not stand for Belgian authorities enforcing their own child abuse laws against Jews. Not on our watch. Not on our watch. Gideon Saar, Israel's Minister of Foreign Affairs, called the prosecution decision a scarlet letter on Belgian society. He was joined by the U.S. Ambassador to Belgium, Bill White, who said on X that Belgium will be thought of now as anti-Semitic by the world. So again, and it just seems like it's the only thing the American government does. We are just hyper-focused and endlessly employed in defending despicable and hostile acts from Jewish populations around the world to their host nations. America steps in to guarantee that those nations bend the knee and allow the actions that are illegal in their laws. Speaking of that, you've got proposed anti-Semitism laws in France and Italy stirring free speech debate. And, I could probably end it here. I could probably end this here, but and I'm going a little bit over, but I'm going to spend 5 minutes laying out something else very strange happening, and I'll just run through it, okay? There are anti-Semitism laws in basically every European country. There are proto-anti-Semitism laws and de facto anti-Semitism laws being imposed here in America, being enforced here in America, even if they aren't technically on the books. They can expand hate speech laws. They can draw out public nuisance laws, and people are being punished for the crime of anti-Semitism. And sometimes that's just a case of like a girl in a Florida university having her life destroyed, being kicked out of university, having the DOJ investigate her for merely cursing at an IDF soldier who was there on campus. or, stop anti-Semitism in all these places. I mean, they have inordinate, incredible power and influence in the highest realms of power here in America, and they use that to punish people for thought crime and speech crimes when they say something like, I don't want to work for Jews. The Jewish diaspora, elite power structure, international superstate sets to work to punish them. You just don't get a trial. It's not actually charged. It's not actually a law in the books, but the punishment is very real. And so that's happening. So anti-Semitism laws in France and Italy are stirring a free speech debate, but they're already in place in the UK and Ireland and Germany and all over, Australia, obviously. But then you have this. New South Wales may expand Jewish security organization CSG's right to carry guns after the Bondi attack. So in Australia, the parliament passes gun reform and anti-hate bills after the Bondi shooting. So there's a shooting on Bondi Beach against the Jewish community. They pass even more stringent gun control laws, making it even harder for the average Australian to own guns, while simultaneously expanding the right of private Jewish security groups to be armed. This is a very concerning trend that we see all over the world, where the normal people are A, having their speech limited, but B, having their ability to protect themselves and defend themselves eliminated. Gun control measures or, anti-weapon measures preventing white, Christian, European descendant Australians or Europeans from doing anything to defend their own people, their own land. I mean, we saw in the rape gang report, men who tried to go get their daughters back from the Muslim rape gangs themselves would be arrested and charged with racism crimes. Totally insane. But at the same time, the Jewish community is not just allowed to arm itself, it's actually allowed to run its own private security networks that are funded by the state. So we're going to see this more and more, especially here in America. The defund the police program is still very much happening. And, they're going to be defunding the local traditional community police, and you're going to get federal police and you're going to get privatized police. So the communities like the Muslims and the Jews, they can advocate for themselves. They can advocate for their own protection, and they can actually get security grants to protect their mosques and their synagogues and their neighborhoods. But the regular people won't be protected by police, can't afford private protection, and will not be getting grants from the government to protect themselves. This is creating a two-tiered system in which only minorities like Jews and Muslims will be provided protection by the state, where the average person will just be out of luck. It's very troubling, and there's a lot of this going on. Royal Commission hears support of arming for security guards at Jewish events. Again, I believe this is in New South Wales. This is Australia as well. So again, they'll take your gun away while simultaneously arming private Jewish security who's not officially government sanctioned or employed by the government. UK plans to spend $250 million over 3 years to protect Jewish communities. So again, the white Christian girls have been raped to the tune of 500,000 girls over the last couple decades. Anybody trying to speak out about that was branded as a racist and sometimes arrested by the UK police and the UK state and charged with crimes for daring to ask for better security. Then 2 Jewish people get stabbed on Golders Green earlier this year. The UK government immediately designates it terrorism and immediately starts funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into the Jewish community for their security, basically saying you deserve to feel safe and we'll do everything we can to protect you. Which again, in the face of a relentless, rapacious attack against the white community that is constantly, you get your boot on the neck, they throw you into jail for trying to defend white people, but Jewish people. And the attack on Golders Green, it wasn't even a targeted attack. The dude stabbed a Muslim guy, then he stabbed 2 Jewish people, then literally the headlines ignored the Muslim guy the guy stabbed. They just say, stabbed 2 Jewish people. He also stabbed a Muslim guy, but that gets in the way of the narrative, and the narrative is needed to say, hey, Jewish people are specifically under attack, so funds have to be given specifically to the Jewish people to defend themselves, which again, just look at it in context of how the UK treats other victims of terrorist attacks. It's very, very unequal. Happening here in America as well. Jewish groups get 94% of Homeland Security grants here in America. So Jewish institutions have their security paid for by American taxpayers. Again, I think a flagrant violation of the separation of church and state. UK Jewish student campaigns for mandatory anti-Semitism class in schools. You have Shamrim. Shamrim are the custodians who act as London's Jewish neighborhood watch group. So these are literally uniformed Jews who go around hassling people for claims of anti-Semitism. They look like police, they act like police, and they are sort of sanctioned by the UK government to go out and do this, but they're just hassling people. And you can watch videos. And again, I should do a whole video. I should do a whole report on just Shamrim, because they're literally just driving around harassing people. And it's people like, there's one example of a guy whose car breaks down in front of a Jewish person's home. The Jewish person calls the Shamrim police and is like, I'm under attack. There's an anti-Semite who's blocking my car in. And the Shamrim go, and the guy's just like, my car is broken down. What are you doing? And then the video is like Shamrim later being like, we caught another one. We saved that woman from that anti-Semitic attack. So they're fabricating anti-Semitism to justify their own existence. But while the people of the UK are literally prevented from protecting themselves and will be thrown in jail for advocating for their own safety, the Jewish community gets uniformed patrollers to go around harassing non-Jewish people, and they're allowed to be armed, and it's all funded by the state itself. Federations applaud senators' push for $750 million in security funding. This is here in America. And once again, we know that already Jewish groups get 94% of all funds distributed domestically for protection, and they're getting hundreds and millions of dollars more because of the attacks that they're under, despite the fact that there are significantly more attacks against churches and Christians and pro-life people and Charlie Kirk. And the main security threat driver right now is not anti-Semitism, it's anti-Christian, anti-white actions, but you will never see white people get the same level of funding and protection that Jewish groups do. This is another form of colonization. DHS awards $94 million in grant to help protect 512 Jewish faith-based organizations. Eyes and ears of the Jewish community, New York City Shamrim Watch Group takes up counterterrorism, and they work hand in hand with the New York PD, and they look like police, but they're not. They're just a militia, a Jewish militia. So, what's happening around the world? What's happening around the world that Israel is expanding its territorial conquest in the immediate area around Israel. It's also trying to overthrow all of the sovereign rulers in every country surrounding it so it can leave it a hellscape like post-war Syria or post-war Iraq, a place where no collection of people can gather to such a strength that they could ever pose Israel a threat, or that they could ever even stop Israel from having freedom of action, like they enjoy bombing Syria on the regular. And as long as Syria stays weak enough that they can't have an air force or anti-air munitions to stop Israel doing that, then that's fine. They're doing that to Iran as well. Simultaneously, the Jewish state is buying islands in the Mediterranean as a plan B in case Israel proper gets destroyed. They want to have a place to go. Simultaneously, private buyers are buying up land in Cyprus and in Greece as well. Also in Albania, you have the Kushners' proposed private resort that's being protested against just off the strait from them. You have a private resort built by Israelis, protested by Italians on the boot of Italy. You also have the same thing happening in the Italian Alps. In South America, you have Israeli influence completely reversing and inverting 20 years of diplomatic practice in South America as pro-Israel people get elected or appointed to positions of power. In Venezuela, we overthrew Maduro in no small part to benefit Israel. Israel is now establishing the home front command there, and the Americans that are being sent as the delegation are clearly the most pro-Israel delegation you can possibly imagine, because to a large part, America already is colonized, just like Europe is already colonized, but they're solidifying and consecrating and making concrete this occupation by establishing rights to Jews to defend themselves, to be funded by the government, to protect themselves and have their own private police forces, while simultaneously making it illegal for the native white Christian population to speak out against this by passing anti-Semitism laws and stripping them of their ability to defend themselves by passing anti-gun legislation, all this other stuff. So this is not a coincidence. None of this stuff is coincidence. In my opinion, there are very clearly very sophisticated and very long-term plans to establish pockets of sovereign Israeli territory in countries all over the world as control nodes of the wider global government that will be headquartered in Israel and managed by the Israeli Jewish diaspora. Again, you can call me crazy. You can say I'm an anti-Semite for looking into this, but I wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't happening, and I wouldn't be blaming the Israelis if they weren't the ones doing it, okay? So it's not my fault they're the ones doing it. It's not my fault that I'm against this. they can stop doing it at any point, and I would be happy to stop talking about it. But this is the way it often goes, is people accuse you of anti-Semitism for merely repeating what the Jews themselves say. Again, not my fault. I would not be talking about it. I would not be bringing this up if it didn't exist and wasn't happening and if it wasn't them. So that's my disclaimer there. Remember, folks, use promo code Harrison at newchristianright.com/conference to get your 20% off your ticket to the new America After Trump New Christian Right Conference in November in Dallas, Texas. Promo code Harrison, all caps, 20% off. Get your tickets today. You're not going to want to miss out. And stay tuned to NXR because there are some very big announcements about this conference, some new speakers, some new developments that you're not going to want to miss. So stay tuned to NXR Studios. Support our sponsors, and we'll see you next week with more. For Off Limits News, this is Harrison Smith signing off.
Everything we do here at NXR Studios is simply one part of a three-pronged approach to winning America for Christ. On the ground, we have our local church, where I preach the Bible and administer word and sacrament. Here at NXR Studios, we focus on politics and culture. But we have a third organization that I am the president of, Right Response Ministries, that sits between the church and NXR Studios. Right Response Ministries puts out weekly written and audio content focused on theology, discipleship, and the church at large. If you'd like to support what we do over there, Right Response Ministries is a 501c3 charitable organization, and your donation of any amount is tax deductible. If you'd like to donate, you can simply go to rightresponseministries.com/donate. Again, that's rightresponseministries.com/donate. Thank you very much.